Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to have you join me today. I'm here in California, but I know some of you are joining from around the U.S. and around the rest of the world. So we welcome you all. In this session, we're talking about complex conversions to QuickBooks Online. Much of the content that we'll be discussing is applicable for global versions of QuickBooks Online. However, other countries' versions may have different features and language. So if you notice things like that, that's expected, especially for things like payroll and tax. Those can be very different among the different countries. Anyway, this course assumes that you are familiar with QuickBooks Online. Perhaps you're already using it with clients. So as we discuss different features of QuickBooks Online, which I'll refer to as QBO, and QuickBooks Online Accountant, which you'll hear me refer to often as QBOA, I will assume that you are already familiar with these definitions and with the basic navigation. Let's talk a little bit about CPE before we get started. This course is eligible for CPE credit. You need to stay in the session for the entire duration of the training. You can receive an hour and a half of CPE credit. I will be providing CPE keywords at various random times throughout this session. And you'll want to make note of them. Write them down, whatever it takes for you to remember them. And at the end of the session, a survey will pop up on screen in a different window. So look for that different window. You don't have to do anything. It'll pop up automatically, but you'll want to enter those keywords in at that time and submit. And then your CPE certificates will be emailed directly to you within 3 weeks. They'll be sent to whatever email address you use to register for VCon, and you'll want to keep those for your records. So let's get started. I'll introduce myself first. My name is Laura Redmond. I am a QuickBooks Online trainer. I'm Advanced Certified QuickBooks Pro Advisor in both desktop and QuickBooks Online, and love both of these products. And I'm also a member of the Intuit Trainer Writer Network. So you'll see me sometimes out on the road. Last week I was in Southern California teaching QuickBooks Online certification, and a few weeks before that I was in the Bahamas at Scaling New Heights, which is Woodard Events' big, wonderful accounting technology show. That was in the Bahamas a few weeks ago, and next year it's in Orlando, so I hope to see you there. When I'm not out training on QuickBooks Online, I run Redmond Accounting, Inc., where we provide cloud-based client accounting services. We have multiple staff, and we're in different states, and we're servicing multiple clients. All of our clients use QuickBooks Online. That was just a decision we made for our firm several years ago. We wanted to go all cloud, so we really appreciate the tools that allow us to access QuickBooks in the cloud. So that is very helpful for us, and we really do adore and use QuickBooks Online every day. I also co-created Arrow Workflow app. This is used by many firms of the future to manage their knowledge capital and their service delivery. It really allows a firm to schedule and delegate its work among different staff members who are working either collaboratively or on their own on the various clients you have in your firm. So let's get started. Today's session is on complex conversions, and these are our learning objectives. We're going to talk about some of the scenarios and data limitations when you're converting from QuickBooks Desktop products. We also want to talk about what data does not convert from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, and we'll go over the post-conversion steps. If you do convert from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, we're going to talk about what are some of the steps you want to take after you've used that conversion tool. And finally, we'll also talk about the process of converting from desktop to online, or from any accounting package to QuickBooks Online, and not using the conversion tool, and do that by entering beginning balances. So we'll start off here. Already we've got our first CPE keyword. Hooray! Write this down. You might not remember it in an hour and a half, so write it down. It's electro. Electro. Okay, I'll give you a second to write that down. And then moving on. Okay, so the first section we're going to dive into is you're just thinking about converting to QuickBooks Online. And what are the things you need to know when you are thinking about converting to QuickBooks Online? And this applies to whether you're setting up a new business or you're converting an existing one. Should you use QuickBooks Online? So you want to think about what the data limits are, how that conversion tool works if you are converting from desktop, what are the different features available in QuickBooks Online as compared to QuickBooks Desktop if you're moving someone with existing historical data, and the subscription users and what that looks like in QuickBooks Online. So let's start talking about data limits. So first thing to know is that QuickBooks Online, there's no database size limit. How cool is that? I mean, you can just sign up for a QuickBooks Online subscription and they're not going to tell you that there's a max. But do keep in mind that if you have so much data, when you do go to run reports, it could slow down the reports as they're trying to calculate. Now, I'm not saying that this is a huge problem for most people, but just do keep it in mind. I have heard that there is a suggestion of perhaps transactions may be fewer than 3,500 transactions a month. That's sort of a known indicator for something you want to look into if the company has more than 3,500 transactions a month. That is not a limit, though. QuickBooks is not going to stop you on the 3,501st transaction and say you can't enter it, not at all. But just keep in mind that there is no database size limit. But if you do have really huge amount of transactions, quantity of transactions, then just know that when you go to run reports for that period, you might want to use a smaller date range so that you don't have to pull so many transactions on the screen, that sort of thing. Okay, but officially, no data limits. Target. The target is a line on a transaction. This is also known as the distribution account. So think about a check in QuickBooks. We know that a check is going to credit or reduce the checking account, and then it's going to debit some or multiple, maybe expense accounts. Those list of accounts that you see on screen are the targets or distribution accounts. And there is a limit if you want to use the conversion tool in QuickBooks Desktop, and you're going to push that data file to QuickBooks Online, then your QuickBooks Desktop data file must have fewer than 350,000 targets in order to use that conversion tool. If your QuickBooks Desktop conversion tool, if your QuickBooks Desktop data file has greater than 350,000 targets, then you will get an option to import your list and balances only. And you can see on screen, I have a screenshot of what that message comes up, what that looks like. And for those of you who know QuickBooks Desktop, when you're in the QuickBooks Desktop data file, you can press the F2 button to pull up the window that will tell you how many targets are in that database. Some other limits to know about are the digit limit is 99 billion, and I mean that per transaction. So if you're entering a check, the highest amount that check can be for is $99 billion. So that should work for most companies. On journal entries, you can have a maximum of 100 lines when you're entering a journal entry. You know your debits and credits have to balance on that journal entry, so you've got to come up with a bunch of lines that are debiting and crediting different accounts, right? You can have up to 100 lines on that journal entry before you need to go create another journal entry if you have other lines. So keep that in mind. Things to know about QuickBooks Online when you're trying to decide whether it's the right fit for you or your client. Character limits. This varies by field, but for example, I'll list a few. The chart of accounts, the name of your account, that field can only be 100 characters. If you are uploading attachments, you know in QuickBooks Online, all of the transaction screens let you attach a source document, which is just the coolest. But one thing to know is that there is no max attachment size limit. You can keep on attaching to transactions in the database, and there's no max that you're going to hit. But per attachment, there is a max. The max file size that you can upload on an individual attachment is 25 megabytes. But you don't have to keep track of how much space you've taken up on all the attachments altogether in the QuickBooks Online company. Just need to know that 25 megabytes per individual attachment. And finally, remember I started off telling you that there's no database size limit. Likewise, there's no limit to how many lists, items you can have, or even transactions. QuickBooks Online is not going to stop you and say, you already have X number of customers, you cannot enter another customer. That's not going to happen. There is no list limit. So by lists, I'm talking about customers, vendors, which for global are called suppliers, for global customers are debtors. So there are no list limits here, but there is a suggestion that the combined lists should try to be kept under 10,000. But again, nothing's going to stop you from adding more. This includes the product and service list items, class lists, location lists. All of these lists, there's no limit. Okay? Now, let's talk about this QuickBooks Desktop conversion tool. This conversion tool is a feature that is built by Intuit developers into QuickBooks Desktop. So this is part of that desktop software. It is available in all of these versions of QuickBooks Desktop, Pro and Premier, Mac, and Enterprise. You need to be the QBO admin user in order to use this tool. So when you're in Desktop and you're pushing the desktop database file up to QuickBooks Online, you'll want to be the QuickBooks Online, one of the admin users. If your client has invited you to QBO as an accountant user, then you are an admin user because accountant users in QBO are admin users. You can use this conversion tool repeatedly in the first 60 days of the QBO company. So you can create a QBO company that's, empty database, and then you can go to your QuickBooks Desktop data file, and you can push it to QuickBooks Online and look at it, and then you can maybe decide you want to make some changes in Desktop and then push it again to QuickBooks Online. You get 60 days to do that before your QBO company will sort of lock down. And then, of course, you can just get rid of that QBO company and start another one if you want. But you have 60 days in which you can use the conversion tool in QuickBooks Desktop to push the data into QuickBooks Online. If you are using QuickBooks Online Accountant, you get the free firm subscription to QBO Plus. It's called Your Books, and you have 1,060 days to push data from a desktop file into your QBOA Your Books. They've given the accounting firms a longer period of time. There are a few things that would stop this if you're using direct deposit or if you've already filed payroll taxes electronically in QuickBooks Online and then you try to push the desktop file to QBO again, it will stop you in those cases. But those are a little more rare. When you use the conversion tool from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, all of the data in QuickBooks Online is completely replaced. So you don't have to worry about pushing data from desktop into QBO and then pushing it again and having it all duplicate. That's not what happens. QBO is completely purged, and the data file is sent into QBO, and therefore it has completely replaced whatever was there moments before. You want to be careful if there were third-party apps connected to the QBO company, because the data in the QBO company is being sent out in many times to the third-party apps that are integrated to it. So if you then overwrite the QBO company by sending data from desktop again, that may have some effect on those third-party apps. So best practice would be to convert from desktop to QBO and get it where you like it, where you're not going to convert from desktop again maybe, and then connect your apps. Another best practice is to run QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online in parallel for a while. Oftentimes in QuickBooks Online, this is a new frontier for us, right? Now QuickBooks Online, we're working in the cloud, we're using third-party apps. We may have a little bit of a different workflow from the way we worked in QuickBooks Desktop. And you may want to learn and design that new workflow in QuickBooks Online and then compare it to your old workflow and sort of run both of them in parallel and make sure that your balances are coming out the same and that you're getting the results you want. When you convert from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, keep in mind that you are sending all of the lists that are in QuickBooks Desktop into QuickBooks Online, if that list exists in QuickBooks Online, and the transactions. But not everything converts. So let's go take a look at what sort of things convert and what sort of things don't convert. We'll start with lists. We'll look at what lists convert, what don't convert, and then we'll take a look at transactions and then settings. Okay, so starting with lists, let's talk about what converts. All of your entities convert. And by entities, I mean your customer list, your vendor list, and your employee list. All of your chart of accounts convert. One thing to know about lists is if they are marked as inactive in QuickBooks Desktop and you push them to QuickBooks Online, they will also be marked as inactive in QuickBooks Online. But in QuickBooks Online, you can never delete a list item, a list name. And even if you see a delete button, you might go to your customer list and click on that customer and click to delete the customer, but it is only going to make them inactive. And this is in line with the way SaaS software is working. So just keep that in mind. If you have a lot of list records that you do not want to clutter up QuickBooks Online, then you want to clean up those lists in QuickBooks Desktop. And by that I mean delete them if you can before you convert. Once you convert, if they were inactive in Desktop, they'll be inactive in QuickBooks Online. So again, your chart of accounts converts, your account type will convert, and by that I mean asset, equity, income, expense, that account type will convert. But there's a new field in the chart of accounts called detail type. The detail type will automatically be assigned on conversion. In QuickBooks Online, we have this not only account type, but detail type that we don't have in QuickBooks Desktop. So just something to keep in mind, that will be automatically assigned on conversion, and if you want to change it later, you can edit and change the chart of accounts once it gets to QuickBooks Online. Also something to keep in mind, non-posting accounts in QuickBooks Desktop do not convert to QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks Online does not have non-posting accounts. QuickBooks Online does have non-posting transactions that just don't hit the general ledger, but they don't have non-posting accounts. On that customer list, All of your customers will convert, your vendors, your employees, but there are no custom fields for customer, vendor, or employees. So just keep in mind that any data that's in the custom fields, say your customer custom fields in QuickBooks Desktop, will not convert to QuickBooks Online because there are no custom fields for customer in QuickBooks Online. There are custom fields on transaction, but not in customer. We'll get to that next. There are also some fields in the customer list that I'm not just talking about custom fields for customer. I'm also talking about some fields such as additional contact, rep, price level, job status. These fields do not exist in QuickBooks Online, so any data in them will not convert to QuickBooks Online. Now, if you're using customer and customer jobs in QuickBooks Desktop, that does convert to QuickBooks Online. And so jobs in QuickBooks Desktop are imported to QuickBooks Online as sub-customers, which is what they are in QuickBooks Desktop. So those do convert. On the employee list, if you're using QuickBooks Desktop Payroll, any employees who have been paid in the current year will convert as active employees to QuickBooks Online. All the other employees will be converted as inactive. The payroll items you have set up, in QuickBooks Desktop we have the payroll items list. In QuickBooks Online we don't have a list like that, but we do have payroll items will be activated or not based on what was selected in QuickBooks Desktop. If there's an incompatible payroll item, then none of the payroll items will import and your payroll will have to be set up manually. But otherwise, most employee information converts from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online. Your product and service items, that list also converts from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online. When you convert to QuickBooks Online, there are 3 item types. And you know there are more in QuickBooks Desktop, but we have 3 item types in QuickBooks Online: inventory, non-inventory, and service. So when you convert, and we'll look at the conversion process in a little bit, we're just talking about what converts and what doesn't right now, but when you convert, you'll be asked whether you want to turn on inventory or not. And again, inventory, just to preface this, I think most of you here know this, but in QuickBooks Online, there are 3 versions, and the top version, QuickBooks Online Plus, is the only version that has inventory. So if you're converting from Desktop to QuickBooks Online Plus, you'll be asked whether you want to turn on inventory. If you select yes to turn on inventory, it's going to convert your inventory to FIFO, first in, first out, and we know that QuickBooks Desktop is the weighted average. Also, any assemblies and parts that you have in QuickBooks Desktop will convert over to QuickBooks Online as type inventory. The other item types in QuickBooks Desktop, such as service, other charge, payment, discount, fixed asset, those all move over to QuickBooks Online as type service. The item types in QuickBooks Desktop, subtotal and group, do not exist in QuickBooks Online yet. But they are not imported. Now, if you don't turn on inventory on conversion, the inventory and assembly items in QuickBooks Desktop become type non-inventory part in QuickBooks Online. And when you convert to QuickBooks Online and you select not to turn on inventory, then there are 2 sub-items for every item that you had in QuickBooks Desktop. So you will now have 3. Each of your items will come over plus 2 additional sub-items for cost of goods sold and inventory assets. Okay, so something to keep in mind there. If you had inventory in QuickBooks Desktop and you push to QuickBooks Online and select not to turn on inventory. Sales tax items do convert to the Sales Tax Center. They're not going to be found in the list area. They are in the Sales Tax Center. QuickBooks Online does support multiple, single, and combined sales tax rates. If you had a in QuickBooks Desktop, if you had a sales tax item, then in QuickBooks Online, when you navigate to the Sales Tax Center, you'll see that has converted over as a single sales tax rate. If in QuickBooks Desktop you had a sales tax group, then you will see in QuickBooks Online that converted as in the Sales Tax Center as a combined sales tax rate. Memorized transactions do convert to QuickBooks Online. They are called recurring transactions, and you can find them on the gear icon. If you had other names, if you had a list of other names, customer, vendor, employee, and other names, those will convert to QuickBooks Online as vendors. We don't have other names list in QuickBooks Online, so those will come over as vendors. And finally, budgets do convert to QuickBooks Online if they were P&L budgets. So if you had a P&L budget in QuickBooks Desktop, that will convert. Okay, let's talk about list items that do not convert.
Hi,
I'm
Laura.
going to call out some of these. Hi.
Hi, just a quick note. We're getting a little bit of interference on your line. Would you mind just taking a brief moment and calling back in?
Of course. Okay, I'll do this as quickly as I can. Thank you for bringing that up. I know that's hard to listen to. It sounds perfectly clear on my side. Be right back.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience. This will take just a moment.
Hello, I'm back. How's this? Any better?
We still have a little bit of static on your line there. Could you try adjusting your headset or any headphones that you're using?
Yeah, let's try one thing.
Great. Your line sounds clear now.
Okay.
If you'd like to
how's
try
this?
speaking. That sounds great.
Good?
Thank you so much.
Great.
Yep.
Okay. I turned the setting off of my headphone and put it back on to see if it would grab it any better. Okay, everyone, thank you for staying with us during that brief technical pause. Hopefully you can hear me more clearly. Certainly stop me if we want to try this again in a little bit. So we're talking about which list items convert using the QuickBooks Desktop conversion tool and which do not. So here is on screen is a slide showing the lists that do not convert from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online. Custom fields for example, your customer. Your customer in QuickBooks Desktop, you can add custom fields. And if you do, that data will not convert to QuickBooks Online. If you have custom sales forms, and by that I mean if you have a custom invoice that you've built in QuickBooks Desktop Layout Designer, those do not convert to QuickBooks Online. User permissions. If you've set up users in QuickBooks Desktop, those do not convert to QuickBooks Online. You will need to set up the QuickBooks Online company and then invite each of the users that you want to, because this is a different way to access. It's a different software, and it's also a different permission basis in QuickBooks Online. So you want to re-invite any of the users that will be using QuickBooks Online. When you set up your chart of accounts for type banks, there is a field in QuickBooks Desktop where you can put the bank account number. That field does not exist in QuickBooks Online, so when you convert, that data will not come over to QuickBooks Online. There's no place to put it in QuickBooks Online. I mentioned before that your chart of accounts does convert, but non-posting accounts do not convert. There are no non-posting accounts in QuickBooks Online. We went over some of the entity fields on the last slide that if they don't exist in QuickBooks Online, they will not convert. Customer messages, and by that, I'll just take a second and remind you, by that I mean, remember on your customer list you have additional contact, price level, job start date, things like that. Those don't exist. Those fields don't exist in the customer list in QuickBooks Online, so those will not come across. Customer messages, you can set these up in QuickBooks Desktop, and those do not convert because that does not exist in QuickBooks Online. Also, price levels. We do not have this feature in QuickBooks Online, as well as units of measure. That feature does not exist in QuickBooks Online, so that data will not convert. Okay, that was lists. Now let's talk about transactions. All of your transactions that have hit the general ledger and even some of your non-posting transactions will be converted from QuickBooks Online to QuickBooks Desktop using the QuickBooks Desktop conversion tool if the target count in the QuickBooks database, desktop database, was under 350,000 targets. So some of the things that, and when I say definitely all posting transactions, when I say some non-posting transactions, I mean if the non-posting transaction type exists in QuickBooks Online, it will convert. Estimates convert, purchase orders convert, but sales orders do not exist in QuickBooks Online. So sales orders in QuickBooks Desktop do not convert to QuickBooks Online. Statement charges in QuickBooks Desktop, if you've charged fees for late invoices, statement charges convert to QuickBooks Online as transaction type invoice. Reconciliations and reconciliation reports do not convert to QuickBooks Online from desktop, but the R reconciled status on each transaction does convert. There are some custom fields that you can put. You can put 3 custom fields on your sales forms, like say on your invoices or estimates. You can set those up in QuickBooks Online. I'm not talking about the custom fields on the customer record. Those we already said we don't have in QBO. Those will not convert. But there are 3 custom fields that you can put on sales forms, like invoices, in QuickBooks Online. And if you convert from QuickBooks Desktop, by the way, you set those up by going to the gear icon and going to Account and Settings, and then go to your Sales settings, and you can set up your 3 custom fields. If you have data in QuickBooks Desktop on your invoices in the PO number field, we don't have a PO number field on sales forms in QuickBooks Online, but that will convert into custom field number 1 in QuickBooks Online. And if you had data in QuickBooks Desktop sales rep field on invoices in QuickBooks Desktop, that will convert to QuickBooks Online's custom field number 2. Okay, now remember I said that if you convert from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online, you'll be given the option to turn on inventory. If you turn on inventory, transactions data, if you turn on inventory, you'll have to specify a date that you want to cut over and change your inventory method from average to FIFO. Transactions that are dated before that FIFO, first in, first out, start date, the invoices are going to record the sales only. Now, normally in QuickBooks Online, when you record a sale, say you record an invoice, it's going to record the income, so the sale, and it's going to make the adjustment between cost of goods sold and inventory. But for these transactions that convert from desktop before the FIFO start date, it's going to lock them down. And the invoices, if you go look at the historical invoices, transaction journals, it's just going to be recording the sales. A separate entry is made to adjust cost of goods sold and inventory. Any transactions dated that were in QuickBooks Desktop that are dated after the FIFO start date, you're going to have all 3 accounts hit. The sale, of course, sale and accounts receivable, and the cost of goods sold and the inventory reduction are all going to be recorded on that sales transaction journal using the FIFO method. Now, if you convert to from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online and you elect not to turn on inventory, then there will be 3 lines on every invoice or sales receipt for each item that you sold. and it will be recording the sale, the cost of goods sold, and the inventory. Each of those 3 lines. So for every line you had on your invoice before, it will have 3 lines. Each of those lines will be recording the sale, the cost of goods sold, and the inventory. So you don't want to resend these invoices to customers or they'll see this information, which is generally sensitive information. So just things to know about converting. Sales tax. Sales tax on invoices, as we discussed, it does convert. The summary info on taxable sales, the liability amounts, the payments you've made to remit sales tax, all of this information can be found in the Sales Tax Center. The liability from sales forms, like your invoices and sales receipts, and your tax payments are all posted to a balance sheet account that's called Agency Name Payable. So you'll have set up in your Sales Tax Center whatever the name of the agency is for each of the sales tax that you collect and remit, and that will be the name of the balance sheet account, Agency Name Payable. For payroll, your historical paychecks and your tax payments will convert to QuickBooks Online, but they will not be found in the payroll module. They'll just be converted into the general ledger as regular checks. The year-to-date summary information for your employees does convert to the payroll module. However, the direct deposit and the e-filing of the taxes and forms does not convert, so you'll need to activate and set up electronic services when you convert to QuickBooks Online. Again, purchase orders do convert. They're no longer linked to the bill, however. And journal entries do convert, but if any of them were marked as billable, that does not convert because in QuickBooks Online, you cannot mark a journal entry line as billable to a customer. Okay? So next we'll look at the QuickBooks Desktop Conversion Tool for transactions at what does not convert. Reconciliations, again, as we stated before, reconciliations do not convert. The reports do not convert. So when you convert to QuickBooks Online, you go to the gear icon, Reconcile screen. You will not see you pick the checking account, for example. You will not see a list of every month that you've reconciled in desktop. You would just save your desktop file for any of that sort of information you want to reference. However, the R reconciled status, as we said on the slide previously, does convert. So when you first move over to QuickBooks Online, everything that's been reconciled in the history of that database will be marked R reconciled, and you can do a quick setup one-time reconciliation, and we'll look at that in a minute. Group items, sales orders. Sales orders do not convert to QuickBooks Online. We do not have sales orders in QuickBooks Online, but you could use a third-party app such as Transaction Pro Importer to pull sales orders in as estimates if that works for your situation. And finally, again, the billable status of journal entries does not convert. Okay, it is time for another CPE keyword. This is number 2, Frogman. And there's a hyphen in there, Frogman. So write this down. You will need to enter it in a little bit at the end of this survey. At the end of this session on the survey that pops up. Okay, Frogman. Okay, moving forward. Now let's look at what converts related to settings. Settings, again, are sort of the global preferences of the database. In QuickBooks Desktop, you know this as Edit Preferences. In QuickBooks Online, a lot of these settings are found on the gear icon and go to Account and Settings. So your company information, the name, the tax ID number, the address, that sort of stuff does convert. The closing date does convert. So if you had closed the period through, say, May 31st, in QuickBooks Desktop, that will convert to QuickBooks Online. You'll see on the next slide, though, that if you had a password on it, the password does not convert. But the closing date does convert. Multi-currency does convert. Your settings that do not convert are listed here. A lot of the company settings do not convert, and my feeling on this is just that these are two different software programs, and you need to go activate the features that you're going to use in QuickBooks Online when you set up a new QuickBooks Online company, and then push that data over from QuickBooks Desktop. So you want to go through all your company settings. They're just different than Desktop, so you'll go through those and set the right ones. Again, your closing date does convert, but your closing date password does not convert. I mentioned this earlier. Any custom sales form designs you have that you created using Layout Designer, those do not convert to QuickBooks Online. The audit trail and exceptions reports in QuickBooks Desktop do not convert to QuickBooks Online. In QuickBooks Online, we have the audit log, which tracks the audit trail of all transactions, plus more: who logged in, who logged out, third-party integrations, changes to list items, changes to reconciliation. So in QuickBooks Online, we have even a bigger audit log. But that audit trail from QuickBooks Desktop does not come over. Your QuickBooks Online audit log is just going to have information for things that were added and edited and deleted in QuickBooks Online, nothing to do with what converted over. Your banking connection and any activity from the bank feeds do not convert from Desktop. Bank feed is not posted to the general ledger until you add it or match it. So that bank feed you'll want to set up in QuickBooks Online. Users and permissions, we mentioned that earlier, not converted. Memorized reports in QuickBooks Desktop, not converted to QuickBooks Online. You'll need to go set those up in QuickBooks Online. Any third-party app connections, some of them will require a new subscription to that third-party app, depending on the app, so you'll want to look into that and reconnect those when you set up QuickBooks Online. Also, you'll want to do not convert. So now I want to talk about the QuickBooks Desktop feature comparisons. Keep in mind, again, that these are two different programs. QuickBooks Desktop has been around longer than QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks Online is coming out at a different time, and in some cases, accounting firms are looking at new and maybe even more efficient ways of doing work. So it doesn't hurt to rethink your processes, how you're going to handle things, if it can be automated using today's technology. It may be that the benefits of QuickBooks Online outweigh any disadvantages, and that you're willing to use some workarounds for some of the things that you're trying to replicate from QuickBooks Desktop. And it may be that a third-party app will do some of this work. And it may be that some of the users that need to do some of the work related to sales or operations, maybe you don't even need them in QuickBooks Online and you prefer for them to be working in a third-party app. So these are just some things to keep in mind as you compare the two software programs. This first slide up here is showing what features are available in QuickBooks Desktop that are not available in QuickBooks Online. So you can see it here. I'll call out a few of them. Progress invoicing, online bill pay. There's an app for that, bill.com, online bill pay. We don't need that in QuickBooks Online because you can use an app for that. Mileage tracking, several apps do this. Expensify, payroll labor costing. So I just want to call this out. QuickBooks Online absolutely does job costing. Every transaction screen in QuickBooks Online will, if you have QBO Plus and you set up that you're going to track expenses associated to customers, you can absolutely assign all expenses to a customer job. If you use any of the online payroll solutions that work with QuickBooks Online, they will post all of the payroll, wages, and taxes into QuickBooks Online, but the payroll system does not allocate it by customer. So that should actually say automated payroll labor costing is not available in QuickBooks Online, but you could absolutely manually allocate it to customers. But something to keep in mind because QuickBooks Desktop Payroll does allocate to customers and allow for that very important labor costing. To many industries, many businesses, that is a must-have. The batch enter transactions tool, the period copy, so all of these that you see on screen, multiple AR accounts, multiple AP accounts, inventory assemblies, these are not available in QuickBooks Online. Okay? Next screen is, these are features that are found in QuickBooks Online that are not available in QuickBooks Desktop. The ability to auto-send invoices. You know, you can set up some, for certain companies, they have some charges that they're going to send to their clients, let's say once a month, and they're already set up. You can set up the invoice or sales receipt as a recurring transaction in QuickBooks Online. For sales receipts, you can even have it automatically charge their credit card, and you can set the frequency on that, and not only will it record it on the book, it will send the invoice. If it's an invoice, you can check to have it send the invoice. You don't even have to log into QuickBooks Desktop or turn on your computer because this is on Intuit server, so auto-sending invoices is just a huge benefit for some companies that have this type of sales situation. Auto-sending reports. Likewise with reports, you may have a nonprofit and you want to report to the board every so often. You have a group of reports. I'm just thinking of a scenario here. And you can set them to be emailed automatically to a list of email addresses. They don't have to be QBO users. Just set up any email addresses that you want, and these reports will go out at whatever frequency you tell them to. The audit log we have in QuickBooks Online is much bigger than the audit trail in QuickBooks Desktop. In QuickBooks Online, of course, we have first in, first out inventory, which is for some preferable. The ability to put multiple AR and AP accounts on journal entries. That is a bugger for some people. You can't do that in Desktop, and you certainly can in QuickBooks Online. We also have in QuickBooks Online Plus the ability to invite unlimited time tracking users to go to a browser, log in, and enter their time. So if you have staff, contractors that are doing the work for your clients, they can log their time, and they can even mark it as billable, and you can pull that onto invoices to invoice your customers. Then you also have the unlimited reports users. And reports users log in. They can't make any changes to transactions, but they can view all of the reports available in QuickBooks Online. Okay, another thing, just again, we're still talking about understanding, comprehending the differences between QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online and whether to convert. So in that, I just want to talk briefly about the users for QuickBooks Online. All of the versions of QuickBooks Online allow for you to invite 2 free additional account users. So you have, QuickBooks Online has 3 versions. Simple Start, there is only 1 regular user plus 2 free account users. QuickBooks Online Essentials, you get 3 regular users plus 2 free account users. And QuickBooks Online Plus, you get 5 regular users plus 2 free account users. QuickBooks Online Plus also lets you have, as I just was saying on the previous slide, unlimited reports only users and unlimited time tracking only users. In addition to that, QuickBooks Online Plus, when you reach all 5 users and you click to add a new user, the 6th regular user, it will ask you if you want to upgrade to the next billing level, and you'll have a message that looks like this on screen. Here's a screenshot. And you can click to accept that you want to upgrade to the next level. And then at any time, if you want to return to the lower billing level, you'll delete the excess users to get back down to 5 users. And when you delete the 6th user, it will ask you if you want to downgrade your subscription. So the billing levels in QuickBooks Online Plus are 1 to 5 users. Then the next level is 6 to 10 users. And the next level is 11 to 25 users. And then after 25, it's you can continue adding users. Okay, so the next part of today's discussion is about the actual conversion process. One option is to use the conversion tool in QuickBooks Desktop, and another option is to not use that conversion tool. So we talked about what converts and what doesn't. And if you're working with a company that already has existing business, I mean, obviously if they're a new company, you start them in QuickBooks Online, you know what features it has, you've determined it's right for them, you start them in QuickBooks Online, there is nothing to convert. So here I'm talking about companies that have existing historical financial data, and you decide whether to convert them or not using the conversion tool. We just talked about what converted or not. So let's go through these steps. First, we'll start by talking about the steps related if you do use the conversion tool. Here are the best practices for using the conversion tool. The first step is to start by logging into your QuickBooks Online accountant firm and creating a new QBO company, because you may want to put them on your wholesale billing plan or not, but you want them on your client list. So first of all, if you're using QuickBooks Online Accountant for your firm, you would want to go create the client company there from QuickBooks Online Accountant. Then you're going to make a backup of the QuickBooks desktop data file. Now, in the conversion process, nothing is going to happen to your desktop data file, so don't feel like I'm telling you to make a backup because something is going to be changed about it. But just as a best practice, it's nice to have a snapshot of what the data file looks like when you sent it to QuickBooks Online, because you may be running in parallel using both of them for a little while. Then in QuickBooks Desktop, you'll want to update to the latest conversion tool, because remember, the conversion tool is part of the QuickBooks Desktop program. Then you're going to verify targets. We're going to go look at some screenshots of the rest of this. So the rest of this I'll talk about here. We're going to verify targets, verify data, and send it to QBO. Okay, let's look at what that looks like. In QuickBooks Desktop, these screenshots now are of QuickBooks Desktop. You want to go to the Help menu and go to Update QuickBooks, and you want to update to the most recent release, because the developers who are building the conversion tool are often updating what converts, and you want to use the most recent release. And so you'll get the update, and then of course you'll have to exit and reopen QuickBooks Desktop to install it. So once you're using the most recent version of QuickBooks Desktop, then you want to hit the F2 button and verify your total target count is within that allowable range. You need to be under 350,000 targets. If your data file is too large and you convert to QuickBooks Online, you're going to get an option to import lists and balances instead of all transactions. If your data file is too large but you want to pull all transactions over, all the detailed transactions, you could look into using the condense utility to try to get a smaller data file. And again, personally, I don't think it hurts to go and just push it to QBO and see what it looks like, right? Because you can push it again if you want to overwrite that. So after you verify your target count, then you want to come to the File menu, go to Utilities, and verify your data. Do not send a corrupt data file to QuickBooks Online, it is not going to get any better over there. So you want to make sure that your data is not corrupt in your QuickBooks desktop. So you want to do your verify data. And you can also here perform, at this point, some tasks like you can resort your lists. You can, if your data does not verify, try resorting your lists. You could create and restore a portable company file. That can sometimes fix data integrity issues. That's going to condense your database and then reopen it. And then you could also use the tool that's on the screenshot just below verify data. You can use the rebuild data utility. And then you can verify data again and see if you get a clean bill of health. And then finally, you're going to go to the company menu. Down to the last option on that menu is to export company file to QuickBooks Online. And when you do this, you're going to have a little pop-up screen. It's going to ask you to log in with your Intuit ID. And when you do that, it's going to give you a drop-down menu, and it's going to show you all of the QBO companies that are within the 60-day limit from when the QBO company was first created. So any QBO companies that are within that limit, allowing you to overwrite them, will show in the drop-down menu. So be very careful and pick the QBO company that you want to push this data file to. After you pick which company you want to push it to, then you're going to be asked whether or not you want to bring your inventory. If you say yes to inventory, then you're going to specify a date, the date that you're going to turn on inventory and calculate using the FIFO method. Use the first day of the day after the tax return. If you're using Revel, point of sale, then you want to say no, don't turn on inventory, because Revel has a different setup for it. Then you're going to wait until you get an email, and it could be a couple of minutes, it could be several hours, but you're going to wait until you get an email that tells you that your data has been successfully pushed to QuickBooks Online or converted to QuickBooks Online. Just a couple of notes on if you're not using QuickBooks Desktop, Pro, or Premier. If you're using QuickBooks Enterprise or QuickBooks Mac, I'll just give they're fairly similar processes. I'll just remark on a few differences. If you're using QuickBooks Desktop, if you're using QuickBooks Enterprise, it's not officially supported that you can send the data file to QuickBooks Online, but you can do it. In some cases, a smallish company was using QuickBooks Enterprise and it was overkill, and the company may be perfectly fine to have their data converted to QuickBooks Online. So just so you know, it is there. It's not as easy to find, but you would want to do similar steps. You'd go to Help and update QuickBooks to get the latest release. Then you go press the F2 button, and then you hit Control-B, Control-Q. It's like QB for QuickBooks, but backwards. Control-B, Control-Q. Then you have to click OK to close the product info window. After you do these super secret steps, the wizard will pop up and walk you through how to log into QBO and select the company to push data to. Now, if you're using QuickBooks Mac, the steps are not as secretive. In that case, you would go to QuickBooks menu and check for QB updates, and then you go to File, Export to QBO, and follow the instructions. Oh, here's that shot of the export company file. And here's the shot of when it asks you if you want to turn on inventory in QuickBooks Online or not when you're converting. So you'd say yes or no. And if you say yes, you're going to put the date in. Okay, once you convert your desktop data file to QuickBooks Online, there are some post-conversion steps that we need to do. And first, let's talk about some of the general steps that we all want to do. if we convert from desktop. The first step, of course, is to verify your reports. You want to make sure that that general ledger, that your balances in QuickBooks Online are matching your balances in QuickBooks Desktop. So you want to go run an accrual basis balance sheet and P&L in QuickBooks Desktop, and then run the same accrual basis balance sheet and P&L in QuickBooks Online and compare your totals for all dates. On those two reports in QuickBooks Desktop, do all dates. Same in QuickBooks Online, all dates. Make sure your balances are the same. And then you may want to run some other ones depending on the company. If the company has AR, AP, sales tax, payroll taxes, you may want to run some of these other reports and make sure that they're matching in QuickBooks Online. Next, you're going to want to go in QuickBooks Online to the gear icon and configure your settings, your company settings. You'll want to customize any sales forms. You know, we have Layout Designer in QuickBooks Desktop, but in QuickBooks Online we have some really cool sales form customization options. So you'll want to go design what your invoices and sales receipts and estimates are going to look like. You'll want to, if there was a closing date that converted from QuickBooks Desktop, you're going to want to go set the password if you were using a password, because remember that doesn't convert. You want to turn on and activate some of the features that you want to use in QuickBooks Online. For example, there's one feature that allows you to copy estimates to invoices in QuickBooks Online. So you'll want to turn that on if you're going to want to use that. Some people like to, so you'd need to activate this, like to pre-fill forms with the previously entered content, right? So when you go to write a check to Amazon, you want it to pre-fill what account you used previously. So you would need to go activate that feature. So go through all your company settings and turn on and off the things you want, how you want QuickBooks Online to work for you. Then you need to do an initial reconciliation. You want to go to the gear icon in QuickBooks Online, go to Reconcile, and then you're going to enter the ending date and ending balance from the last QuickBooks Desktop reconciliation. And then say OK and go to the next screen, and you should have a list of lots of transactions. All of them should already have check marks on them, because there are actually, you should not have those. The cleared ones would be there with check marks. You should not have to check off anything, though. All of those transactions that converted from desktop are going to have the R status when they came over to QuickBooks Online, so you won't see those at all. The things you will see are either cleared because a bank match is attached to them, or they're not cleared or reconciled. So you should not have to check anything off. You should just have to click the Finish button. After that initial reconciliation, you may want to go into the Report Center and create any of the custom reports that you were using in QuickBooks Desktop for this company. You'll have the option to share them either with all users or to put them into a group if you want to organize them there. And that's where they'll be found in your custom reports in the Report Center. And finally, you'll want to go set up and invite the users who you want to have access to this QuickBooks Online company and set the appropriate permissions. And then, of course, also if you're going to integrate apps, you'll want to set up and implement apps like Bill.com, Expensify, Method, whatever third-party apps you're going to use. Next, we have some post-conversion work related to the bank feeds. You'll want to connect. Remember that the bank feeds do not convert from QuickBooks Desktop, and certainly the connection doesn't. You'll want to, in QuickBooks Online, connect to the client's bank for every bank account and credit card account. The default setting on each of those is to download the last 90 days of activity. So if you're converting a desktop file that has everything already entered into it as of today, and you're pushing it to QuickBooks Online, and then you're connecting the bank, you may not want to download the last 90 days of activity. You may want to change that to 0 days of activity, or maybe you only want the last 7 days. So you're going to get 4 choices when you connect the bank: 0, 7, 30, and 90. So pick the one that's appropriate for you. A couple of things to keep in mind. If there are no transactions in the QuickBooks Online checking account, in that chart of accounts account, and you connect it to a bank, QBO is going to go out and get whatever you specified, the last, let's say, 90 days of activity. QBO is also going to record the opening balance in the bank balance in the register. So you'll want to go delete that. That's just a little something to know that it's currently doing. And you'll want to delete that because, of course, you don't want to enter that. It's going to offset to the opening balance equity account, and we don't want that. So now we're talking about converting from a desktop file, so it's not likely that you have a QBO bank account that has no transactions in it. In most cases, you're converting bank accounts with lots of transactions, and they will convert nicely over here to QuickBooks Online. And you're just going to connect the bank, download however much banking activity you want, and then you're going to match or add that activity. But just be careful here, and certainly if your client is doing this post-conversion work, help them, because this is where a lot of mistakes can be made with duplicate transactions. If you are converting from desktop and all of the transactions are entered up to a week ago, then you just want to be careful that you download the past week of activity and then enter that activity. If you had converted QuickBooks desktop file and everything was entered as of, let's say, 2 weeks ago, you might want to pull in the last 30 days and then go exclude the 2 weeks that you already had and only add and match the 2 weeks that are new. So I think you're following me here, but be very careful with setting up this initial bank with the bank feeds and help your clients through this so that they don't make any duplicate transactions. Now, if you have a bunch of bank feed load in and you think, oh, I didn't mean to bring that much in, no harm done. You know, if you haven't added them and if you haven't added duplicate transactions and they're just on the bank feed screen, you can just go on the banking screen and check each of those transactions that you really didn't mean to bring into QuickBooks, and there's a batch action to exclude them. And then once they move over to the banking's excluded tab, you can go over there and delete them. By the way, if your client does this work and they had already entered this data, say up to the past 2 weeks in QuickBooks Desktop, converted it to QuickBooks Online, set up the bank feed for the past 30 days, pulled it all in, and entered a whole bunch, say 2 weeks overlap was duplicate. Let's say they did go enter it again and you have a bunch of duplicates there. You can find those on the banking screen by going to the In QuickBooks tab on the banking screen, check each of those lines, and you can batch undo, and that will not only unmatch the bank feed, but also undo the transaction that was added when they added that from the banking screen. And then once you get that bank feed, you can exclude it and delete those out, the duplicate. Okay, see, that's complex conversions, right? Next, we've got the inventory post-conversion work. If during the conversion, they opted to turn on inventory, this is going to activate the company setting to track quantity on hand for you. It's automatically going to turn that on inventory in QuickBooks Online, and I'm assuming this is QuickBooks Online Plus. It's going to lock down all of the transactions prior to the inventory conversion date, because those are based on the weighted average inventory valuation. So if you run your reports when you convert from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online for all dates, then your reports are not going to match. They can't match because if you've got some transactions after the conversion date, the inventory conversion date, that are FIFO method, they're going to be, they're just going to have a different costing method on them. So those reports won't match. You may just want to run your reports as of the inventory conversion date and see if all of the weighted average reporting matches. You also, if you turn on inventory, want to make sure that you notify the IRS of the change in inventory method. One note here, QuickBooks Mac, when you convert, it does not support this inventory conversion. So you need to convert your QuickBooks for Mac database to QuickBooks Pro or Premier, and then you can convert to QuickBooks Online, and there you'll have the option whether you want to turn on inventory or not. If you elect to not turn on inventory, then remember I mentioned that for every product service item that you had in QuickBooks Desktop, you will have 3 in QuickBooks Online. You'll have the regular item plus 2 sub-accounts for cost of goods sold and inventory assets. On all of your historical sales transactions, like your invoices, you will see 3 line items for every item that you had in QuickBooks Desktop. So for invoice and for sales receipts, but for invoices specifically, you want to make sure not to resend those to customers because they will see the cost information. For purchase transactions, if you use checks or bills in QuickBooks Desktop and you were using product service items called items in QuickBooks Desktop, when those convert to QuickBooks Online, they convert using the account that was mapped to the item. So that, just know that that's something that happens during the conversion process. And finally, we've got payroll. So if you had payroll turned on in QuickBooks Desktop and you convert to QuickBooks Online, it will import and activate payroll in QuickBooks Online for you. You'll want to complete the setup by navigating to the Employee Center, and you'll see a button that says Complete Payroll Setup. And that will take you through some screens that let you review the employee information and also to set up electronic services. If you did not have payroll turned on in QuickBooks Desktop, then when you go to QuickBooks Online, you still could, if you needed payroll, then you still could turn on QuickBooks Online Payroll. And you want to just determine whether you want to do it yourself and use QuickBooks Online Payroll or whether you want Intuit to do it for you and in that case turn on QuickBooks Full Service Payroll. In both cases, QuickBooks is going to calculate the paycheck with the proper tax withholdings, and it's going to calculate the payroll taxes due, and it's going to create the payroll forms for you, such as the 941. Here, of course, I'm talking to U.S. people using QBO U.S. version. But the QuickBooks Online Payroll, meaning not the full service payroll, the QuickBooks Online Payroll that I'm calling the do-it-yourself, you do have to go in there and click around in several places to create those paychecks and to click to remit that payroll tax. If you don't go click that button, the tax will not be remitted. And click to file the forms. Whereas if you sign up for the QuickBooks Full Service Payroll, you basically just give the hours and Intuit will help you set everything up. You give the hours each period, make any changes each period, but they click all the buttons and they guarantee the taxes will be paid and the forms will be filed. And here is a screenshot of that complete payroll setup button. So when you convert from desktop to QBO, if you had payroll turned on and you're converting to QBO, then you want to complete that process. And that's the button I was referring to. Again, I'm on the left navigation bar. You click Employees to go to the Employee Center, and that's where you'll see it. And you'll see any of the employees that have had active payroll data in the calendar year will be listed here below in the employee section. You see the list of employees there. And here's a screenshot of when you click to complete the payroll setup. This is a screenshot of some of the steps it'll take you to. You'll verify all of the year-to-date net pay for each employee, things like that. But all of the information otherwise, the employee information, their name, address, all that stuff is going to come over here. All of their paychecks are going to post to the general ledger. Okay, next we have payments. This is the post-conversion work you want to do related to payments. So, and by payments, let me stop here and define what I mean. Some of you, for many years, using QuickBooks Desktop, are using Intuit Merchant Services, also known as QuickBooks Merchant Services, Intuit Payment Network. If you're using that merchant service, it is now called QuickBooks Payments. And that connection does not convert. So if you were using QuickBooks Payments, or whatever name it was called in the past, that merchant service account will still be open. It's just that when you convert to QuickBooks Online, you need to go connect it to your QuickBooks Online company. And you do that by going in QuickBooks Online to the gear icon, the company settings, and go to the Payments tab there, and there's going to be a button for you to connect your existing Intuit QuickBooks Payments account to QuickBooks Online. The best practice, I'll say, is if you are the master admin of QuickBooks Online and the master admin of QuickBooks Payments. So one thing to keep in mind here is when you connect your QuickBooks Payments account to QuickBooks Online, and this is for those of you who have existing Intuit Merchant Services. If you didn't have an existing merchant service account and you converted from desktop to QuickBooks Online, you can certainly go to gear icon, settings, payments, and apply for a new one. But I'm talking about if you had an existing merchant service account. If you are using that merchant service account to automatically charge some customers, you'll need to go discontinue that. Because what's happening with QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Merchant Services, Intuit Payment Network, QuickBooks Payment, is that QuickBooks Desktop, you would have a recurring or a memorized transaction set up to, let's say, record some recurring sales receipt for some frequency. Then you also had logged into Intuit Payment Network and set up to charge that person's credit card at that same frequency. And Intuit Merchant Services is charging their card and putting the money in your bank account, and QuickBooks Desktop is just booking it to the general ledger. When you move to QuickBooks Online and you connect your existing merchant service account and you go set up a recurring sales receipt, QuickBooks Online does both steps. It books the income and it charges the customer's credit card. So you want to make really sure that you've gone into Intuit Merchant Services Online, outside of QuickBooks Online, and discontinued those recurring payments that you had set up over there. Okay, that brings us to our third CPE, keyword Lava Man. Lava Man. We got another hyphen here. I'll give you guys a second to write this down so that you have it for your survey that's going to pop up automatically in another window at the end of this session. Lava Man. Okay, moving on. We just went through the steps for best practices for how to use the conversion tool. and some of the post-conversion work that you need to do with things like banking, payroll, payments, things like that. So now I want to talk a little bit about what if you're not going to use the conversion tool in QuickBooks Desktop. Maybe you have maybe it's an existing business and you have historical data in the QuickBooks Desktop file, and for whatever reason, lots of good reasons, you may not want to convert it to QuickBooks Online. You may just decide there's a whole bunch of data in there. Maybe it's over the 350K target account limit, max, or maybe it's not and you just don't want to clutter up and you want to do a fresh start, or for whatever reason. Let's talk about some of the things you can do when you don't use the conversion tool. And one of these is that you can still pull in your list of customers, vendors, chart of accounts, and products and services. So you may have a big QuickBooks Desktop data file, or you may have a company who's been using Excel or some other accounting method. And they, for whatever reason, you're not using the QuickBooks Desktop conversion tool, but they may have a long list of customers, for example, or vendors, or their chart of accounts, or product service items. So you can absolutely import these. These 4 lists that I'm talking about, you can import by navigating to the gear icon in QuickBooks Online and selecting Import Data. I'm going to advance to the next slide to show you a screenshot of what that looks like. But just some tips there. When you go to the gear icon and select Import Data, then they're going to show you the 4 types of lists that you can import: customers, vendors, chart of accounts, product service items. And you'll click which one you're importing. And then best practice would be to download the sample file. And the sample file is going to already have the names of all of the fields for that table in them. So you can just delete the sample data from those rows and any other data there, and just leave the top row of field names there. And then you enter or paste your information into the appropriate column: name, address, things like that. And save that data. That's a CSV file or Excel file. And then you'll see on the screenshot here, there are 3 steps. 1, 2, 3. The first step is the Upload File screen. You're just going to click the button and navigate out on your computer and find that data file you want to pull into QuickBooks Online. The second step is the Map Data screen. You're going to approve the field names between what QuickBooks Online field names are and your data file. And if you used that sample file, then this is a no-brainer, because QuickBooks Online, let's say for customer, it's going to have, you know, name, phone number, all that stuff. And you're going to have the proper, if you use the sample file, you're going to have already the proper field names. And then the third step is the import screen, and that's what's showing here on the screenshot. And here you can make any adjustments to the data as needed. And then you click that blue Import button in the bottom right corner, and it's going to pull it into QuickBooks Online. Some things to note about this that are different from QuickBooks Desktop is that for both customers and vendors, the address has separate fields for street. That's a separate field, or in terms of Excel, separate column. Street is separate than city, which is separate than state, which is separate than zip. And if you know QuickBooks Desktop, you know that those are all in one field. Also, customer and vendor opening balances should be 0. So if you get this data out of some other source that has opening balances showing, make those all 0, because you want to pull those in as 0. Otherwise, those are going to have offsetting adjustments to these opening balance equity accounts. Also, if you are pulling in the chart of accounts, then you're going to find that QuickBooks Online requires you to specify a detail type, not only an account type. We know we have to specify asset, expense, that sort of thing. But you're also going to have to specify the detail type. And when you import here, when you get to this screen that I'm showing here for accounts, you can use the drop-down menu to go specify each of those. So decide for you which one's faster. You may want to copy-paste detail types in the Excel spreadsheet before you pull it into QBO, or you may want to wait till you get here and use the drop-down items to pick your detail type. But that will be required when you import. When you import products and services, you are going to need to specify whether these are single-sided items or double-sided items. And you do that by checking a box called Sell and the other box called Buy. If you check Sell, of course, that's a single-sided item. If you check Buy, that's going to make it a double-sided item. Also, something to know, the customer, vendor, and chart of accounts list, when you import these into QuickBooks Online, these are going to add new records into these lists. So if you have a bunch of customers that have already been entered into QuickBooks Online and you import them again, they're going to come in as duplicates, probably with a 1, 2, or 3 behind them. Whereas the products and service list, this one's different. When you go to import products and service list, if the name matches exactly, you'll see a checkbox you can check that says you're just updating information about it. Okay. So our next screen is, we're going to look at some screenshots about this, but this is for businesses who have existing QuickBooks Desktop list data, like customers, chart of accounts, items, and they don't want to convert from desktop to QuickBooks Online, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done to break up the customer and vendor address fields, or to specify the detail types. And so these are some steps that you can do. That's just another method for importing lists using the conversion tool. So what you'll do is, if you have an existing QuickBooks Desktop file that you're not converting, you go to QuickBooks Desktop, you go to File, Utilities, Export, Lists, and you select to export your list to IIF files. And you're going to have this checkbox, this little box that's showing here, and you can check which list you want to export. And then you go create a new empty QuickBooks Desktop company file, and in the new empty data file, you're going to go to File, Utilities, Import IIF files, and pull in this list only. Now you have a QuickBooks Desktop database that only has this list or these lists in it that you want to pull in. Review the list, delete any names that you don't want to push to QBO, and then you're going to go through those steps we already saw, which is to push this desktop data file to QBO. There will be no transactions, but your lists will come over nicely. So that's a really cool other option for getting those lists over. Okay, then finally, we need to record the beginning balances. So you want to do several steps once your lists are imported or added. Then you want to determine the start date for the new QuickBooks Online company. And you want to run the trial balance from the other accounting software, or come up with what the ending balances were just before that start date. You also want to compile all open transactions, such as outstanding checks, outstanding deposits, accounts receivable, accounts payable, the type of activity that is still open, like the checks haven't cleared the bank yet, right? And then you want to gather all of your inventory detail. If you have inventory, what your inventory items are, if you didn't import those, including what the current quantity on hand is, the sales price, the taxable status, that sort of thing. And finally, you want to gather all of the non-posting transactions, such as unbilled billable time, or any delayed charges. That's something we have in QuickBooks Online that You may have mileage or something that needs to be billed to customers. So you want to assemble all of the time and charges that are billable to customers that have not yet been invoiced, that are not included in the list above in the trial balance or open transactions. And then you're going to go through a series of steps. So I'm just going to run through these, and I want to preface this by saying that this really is very difficult to tell each of you accounting professionals exactly how to do it for two reasons. First of all, in step one, I'm going to tell you to use a journal entry just to give some general kind of transaction type. If you prefer to do some of these using a different transaction type and it has the same net result, there's nothing wrong with that. And also, every business is different, so you're really going to need to understand the accounting and understand what the output is. So I'm going to run through these steps, but just as a starting point for people who are trying to learn how to enter beginning balances, these are some general steps to think about. First of all, you're going to use a journal entry transaction, or whatever you think works better, to enter your balance sheet balances. You want to enter like the checking account balance, loan payable, credit card payable. When you're entering the bank account balance, enter the ending bank balance, right? You don't want to enter the book balance because you want to enter the bank balance. You want to enter the bank balance because in a little bit you're going to go enter those outstanding checks so that they are in the system to mark off as reconciled in a future reconciliation. So you want to enter the bank balance on this journal entry. I'm still on step one, journal entry. And then you're going to also want to include in that journal entry prior year retained earnings and prior year net income, and post that to the owner's equity or retained earnings account. You do want to exclude accounts receivable and accounts payable and inventory, things like that, because these are going to be entered in a later step. And on this journal entry, you're going to offset everything to the opening balance equity account. This is your offset account. And as we go through these steps, you'll see that the final step is to make sure that this account is zero. This account is only used for setting up the books, and it should net to zero at the end of all this. Okay, so the second step is then to enter outstanding checks and deposits. You want to use the original dates and amounts using the proper check or deposit transaction type, depending on what it is. You want to select the proper bank account for that outstanding transaction. And you want to post these transactions to the opening balance equity account. Since you've already recorded income and expense for the prior year to the retained earnings account in the previous step. These transactions are going to net with the bank balance that you entered in that first journal entry. The third step is to enter accounts receivable transactions, your invoices. You want to enter those with the original dates and amounts using an invoice transaction. If you're on an accrual basis, you want to add an item to your product service item list called something like beginning balance or whatever that posts to the opening balance equity account. This is going to offset any duplicate sales that you're now recording. Remember, we already recorded retained earnings up in that first step. If you're on a cash basis, you want to recreate the original transaction using your regular list of products and service items that's posting to an income account so that when that payment is received in the future, the income will be reported appropriately. The next step is to open, same sort of as AR, you're going to enter all the open accounts payable transactions. Again, use the original dates and the amounts, use the bill transaction screen. If it's accrual basis, post it to opening balance equity to offset the retained earnings that we entered in step one. If you're cash basis, then recreate the original transaction using your items or accounts so that when you pay that bill, the expenditure will be reported properly as that expense account. Then you want to enter any of your non-posting transactions like time tracking, billable charges, and mark them as billable to the right customer so that they show up. And you can use the delayed charges screen, for example, in QuickBooks Online for that. And finally, your last steps are, sorry, one second, advancing the slide. Your final steps are that you're going to enter if you want to. If the client wants to see mid-year income and expense, then even if you're entering beginning balances for the end of the year, you may want to see, your client may want to run historical comparative reports by month. In that case, you can just use a journal entry dated for each month to record the total of that month's P&L account activity and offset it all to that retained earnings account. So you don't want to duplicate the income and expense that you already posted in step 1. If this one I'm going to be very vague on because this is so dependent on what company you're working with, but look into adjusting and properly recording the sales tax payable and payroll tax payable accounts. That's all I'll say on that. But certainly something you don't want to skip. And then set up your products and services, establish your inventory balances. You can do this by importing. Remember we went over the import process. You can import your inventory. If you import the initial quantity on hand and the cost, it will record the inventory value and offset to opening balance equity. And finally, you want to verify that your opening balance equity account is 0. For this last slide, I'll leave you here and show you that when you import products and services, it will offset to the opening balance equity account. You can actually pull in that data in the QuickBooks Online. So that's it for today. Lots of complexity to converting to QuickBooks Online, and lots out there for all of us to be very valuable to our clients in knowing how to work with QuickBooks Online, especially converting historical information. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm sorry I went a few minutes over. This session will be available in the auditorium in 24 hours, so you can rewatch it if you missed anything. If you want to learn more about complex conversions and you are QuickBooks Online certified, then I highly recommend doing the advanced certification. The first section is all about complex conversions. Thank you so much and have a great day.